Have you just bought yourself a brand new dash cam or maybe a different aftermarket accessory, but there's no slots in the fuse box? How do we plug this in? Well, in this video we're going to be learning about electrical car circuits, things like how car circuits generally work, fuses, wire sizing, do's and don'ts, and when different circuits become active depending on the position of the key in the ignition. Well, what does all that mean? Well, it's designed to be beginner friendly, so anybody can follow this video along and install your new aftermarket accessories into your car or truck. We're going to be using this device as an example for this whole video, and this is called a fuse tap or a fuse tapper. It allows you to install a new fused circuit by piggybacking an existing one. And lastly, I'm going to be showing you how to use your new device when the key is in the run position, the accessory position, or even when the key is removed completely, so you can use it off pure battery power. So stay tuned, because in this video I'll be talking about what this is, how it works, when you should use one, where to use one, and why one of these is generally a bad idea. So before you even buy a fuse tap, locate your fuse box. You might have an empty fuse slot that you can plug straight into. You don't even need one of these. On this vehicle, it only has one fuse box, but depending on the year, make and model of your car or truck, you might have two of them. There could be one under the bonnet here, under the hood, or one inside the vehicle. On this car right here, I have to remove this little glove box here, and we get access to a nice little fuse box inside here. So having a look at your fuse box, you'll notice a few things. On this vehicle here, I have a few empty slots. Usually when you have empty slots, you'll have terminals inside. You can see there's a little bit of metal inside there, and that means I can probably plug into that and use those slots no problem. Sometimes these are totally blank, there's no little metal terminals, and that just indicates it's just like a placeholder. Now this vehicle has various different flavors. There's one with all the bells and whistles, and they're going to have extra circuits for maybe a special roof or something like that. And there's also a diesel edition of this vehicle as well, and that will have extra fuses to cater for that requirement for the diesel model. And what they do, they share the fuse box between all these different models, and therefore they don't have to print a whole different design for a fuse box. They can save money that way. But it does mean we have some cool circuits we can actually not even tap into. We can use no problem. We can plug a dash cam into this one. We could plug in maybe some sort of low wattage inverter into another one. So we don't really need a fuse tap in this vehicle. But I highly recommend you check your fuse box, check out the labels, what's being used, because you might not even need one of these in the first place. But let's assume that we do need one and we need to piggyback an existing circuit. Let's get on with that. So just real quick, just so we're all on the same page about how fuses work, this is a typical fuse that you'll find in the fuse box. So this will be installed in the fuse box like this. You have the power side coming in through the fuse. This is a 10 amp fuse, for example, and that powers, for example, the interior light, which could be 7.5 amps. It probably isn't, but in this example it is. Now what the fuse does, it protects the circuit. It protects not only the device but the wiring, and the wiring here will be sized depending on the fuse which is installed. So this will protect this wiring on this circuit and therefore the device as well. The fuse here will be installed ideally as close to the battery as possible here on the positive side right here. And I say as close to the battery as possible because what if there's a kink in the wire? Maybe we'll lose some insulation on the wire and then this presses against something else, a different wire or the body of the car itself. And there's a short there, it's a short to ground, and therefore the fuse is going to protect the circuit. Otherwise we're going to land into some trouble. Maybe we could start a fire, or our device could, crap out. Lots of things can happen here, and this is why we use fuses in circuits such as this one right here. What can also happen is something like a surge. Maybe our device wants to get a bit hungry and start eating up some, current in here, and it exceeds the capacity of our fuse here, which is 10 amps. Maybe it starts surging to 12 amps, for example. Our fuse is going to blow for that reason as well, therefore protecting the wiring again, which is sized for this circuit, which will be a 10 amp circuit right here. So lots of cool things fuses do, but essentially they're designed to protect the circuit, protect the wiring, prevent fires, and all that dangerous stuff. If you want to learn more about wire sizing and wire gauges, check out the video, I'll link it in the description below, where you can learn more about this. Okay, let's continue. So I did a cool little diagram here so you can get an idea how this works internally. It's quite simple, but they don't really come with instructions, so it's nice to know. So let me show you how it works internally. Now coming up to our fuse tapper right here, we have our power side going in. And then up here will be our original fuse that was in the fuse box right here. And this will be the output, and that will go off to our cool little device there. Now this slot will be our brand new circuit, so this will be our sort of tapped fuse circuit. We can have maybe another cool light or a stereo, perhaps something else using this fuse right here. And how this works internally is that the power side coming in, let's say it's a 12 volt battery for example, this line going in, now this terminal here on this fuse, the original fuse, will share the same line as our new fuse right here. So the 12 line comes in here, also goes into here, and then this is fused and it goes out to our new device. So these two left slots right here will be shared with this line here. And I can demonstrate that with a multimeter here. We have one in the end of the line right here, and that will give us a beep in this corner, but pretty much nowhere else. And again, it's good to check this. You know, there is a very slim chance that these could be wired differently. You don't know where they come from, but generally this is how they are wired up. And again, if I put one on the incoming power line here and test both of these sockets on the left, it's going to beep as well. So there's a simple continuity test, so you can roughly see how it's wired up internally. So let's talk about orientation of the fuse tapper. Do we put it in the fuse box this way, or do we put it in that way? And to answer that, we're going to have a look how this works internally. So coming back to my original point about the orientation of the fuse tapper, which way this is to be inserted into the fuse box, let's say for example we put this the other way round. So now we have our power side going in here, this will be our 12 volts for example, and this will be the output of that. There's our original fuse. We know that this is connected internally right here, and this will be our new fuse, and that will be our output. So what's happening here, if we supply a 12 volt for example into this line, it goes through our original fuse, it goes out, but it also gets fed into our new fuse and out here. So in a situation like this, you have two fuses protecting the same circuit, for example, over here. You're also putting additional stress on these fuses and wires, joining them and things like that. Effectively, you will have two devices running off these fuses right here. So not too good. But not only that, for example, imagine if our original fuse blows, but not our new circuit. Our new circuit is working great. Then because the power is coming through this way, it cannot reach our new device. So effectively this fuse is protecting both devices. So if the fuse blows, then nothing is going to work in this tap. So this is why it's very important to consider orientation when putting the fuse tap into your fuse box.
So fuse taps come in a variety of different sizes. You can get the regular one, the ATC, you can get the mini, the micro, the smallest, the maxi. So it really depends what fuse you're going to be tapping into, which will determine which one you're going to buy. But for these parts, I'll link them all in the description below so you can check them out. So let's talk about why these aren't such a great idea, as I alluded to at the start of the video. So looking at this fuse tapper here, it uses a 16 AWG wire there. That stands for American wiring gauge, I believe. And the smaller the number, the thicker the wire. Now the thicker the wire, the more current it can handle. So this is very important. So a device that uses a lot of current, maybe a heater or a high-powered inverter, for example, will generally have a thicker wire. The longer the wire, again, it needs to be thicker as well to allow for voltage drop. So this is important when talking about why these aren't necessarily such a good idea. So every single fuse in this fuse box here will have these sort of metal terminals here, but essentially that will join onto a wire onto the back of the fuse box that looks something kind of like this right here. And each wire coming out the back of here will have a different gauge of wire, smaller, thicker, depending on what is being fused. I imagine these high amp fuses right here, the 40 and 30, will have a bigger wire behind here, and something like a 15 or a 7.5 will have a smaller wire, because you wouldn't really use thicker wires like this behind here, just to save money really, and various other things as well. And to emphasize my point, you come over to the battery here under the hood. You can see this nice low gauge wire, nice big and meaty here, and again on the positive side as well, because ultimately this is how everything gets power in the vehicle. So you can see how this kind of works. High current, the bigger wire here, the smaller wire, low current. Coming back to my original point here, how do you know the gauge of wiring behind each one of these fuses without looking at a service manual? And to be honest, maybe a service manual might not even cover the gauge of wiring behind these fuses. How do you know how much current these wires can handle based off the fuse? So for example, let's say this 7.5 amp fuse here has appropriately sized wiring for something that's running at 7.5 amps. Maybe the gauge of wiring is good for 10 amps of current. So if we're piggybacking this 7.5 amp fuse here with another circuit, which is another 7.5 amps, each sharing the same positive wire. So if this positive wire is rated for 10 amps and we have two circuits sharing this positive wire on this fuse, and they're both drawing maximum current, for example, then we could be running 15 amps through this positive wire that could be gauged for 10 amps. This is why it's a bad idea. These positive wires can overheat the longer you use the device. It could cause overheating and maybe even a fire in your car, for example. Now, this is just an extreme example, but it could happen, and this is why it's kind of a bad idea. Out of the factory, these fuses are rated for the internal wiring behind them and the wiring that these fuses protect. They're not designed for an additional circuit to piggyback on these internal wires behind these fuses. That is just how cars are designed. However, that being said, maybe you know this fuse belongs to a circuit where the items on this circuit are not continuously drawing power. So piggybacking an existing circuit where it's not continuously drawing power could be a good idea and a good way to use this fuse tapping device. So now we understand this process a little more. It depends on what you're tapping here. So why are you tapping here? Is it for a dash cam, like a low current drawing device, maybe an extra cigarette socket, for example, maybe a fancy voltage meter, something like a low amperage device, a low current drawing device is something you typically use a fuse tapper for. If you want to install maybe an inverter or an additional heater or something like that, a high current drawing device, then this is not the item you want to use for this at all. If you want to add an inverter, anything that uses a high current draw, you want to wire these directly to the car battery or the alternator. This is not something you should ever use for a high current drawing device. So something like a dash cam, perfect. That's typically what you would use something like this for, although I don't highly recommend it in principle. So the question now is, which fuse do I tap into? Well, we need a fuse diagram. Sometimes they're nicely labeled for us on the car. This one has numbers, but it doesn't say what they are. So we're going to need to resort to a service manual or a Google search for the year, make and model of the car. So let's look at which fuse we can tap into the fuse box. So on the left here I have a diagram of the fuse box for this vehicle. If your vehicle has multiple fuse boxes, make sure you pull up the right fuse box. So this is the one I have, and on the right here I have a picture of the fuse box that I took here. So it's more like that orientation. You can see these two fuses here are these two, then we have all of these here, and you can sort of see roughly how that all fits in. So you can see As I mentioned before, we have some vacant slots here that I could easily use, for example. So let's look at this vacant slot right here. It's a huge fuse right there. It is number 39. And that way you'll get an idea of how this kind of works and how you can sort of locate a fuse, not only to use but to tap into. So 39 is an engine type 639.9. So it looks like this fuse box supports various models of this car. So 34 here uses these engine types, the ignition coils there. And this engine type, which I guess this car doesn't have, that's why it's vacant. It uses a 30 amp circuit. And again, we could probe this with a multimeter just to make sure we're actually getting power through here. And if we are, it'll be rated at 30 amps, and that's what the wiring size internally will be catered for on a 30 amp maximum circuit. And again, let's just illustrate that one more time. We have fuse number 6 here, so 6 here, 6 here. This one's vacant. Go to fuse number 6, and it looks like it's actually vacant, so I have no idea what that is. In this case, it might not even test for anything. Again, we can get a multimeter on here and double check these readings. Let's just check this one, number 20, and number 20 looks like for a certain engine type it uses a 7.5 amp maximum circuit on that, which is also vacant. So let's assume we don't have any, free fuse slots to use. We want to tap into one. What fuse can we tap into? What circuit can we tap into? What is safe to tap into? Now, rule of thumb, you don't want to tap into anything that could compromise your safety or anything of that nature. So for example, the car horn. Car horn, it kind of is safety critical. It's maybe not the end of the world, but I wouldn't feel comfortable tapping into this circuit because whatever you install into here, it could be anything. I'm not sure what your, the purpose of this is for you, but we don't want to bring the horn down if there's something wrong with our newly added device, especially if it's an aftermarket device. They're not, they are kind of tested, but, things can go wrong. We don't want to bring our horn down. That wouldn't be too good. Another one would be an airbag. You don't want to mess around with airbags. Imagine if you install a dash cam, there's something wrong with your cheap Chinese dash cam, it brings down your airbag and you get in an accident. It's not good news, is it? Especially with headlights, window wipers, anything safety critical, and even critical to the running of the car, like the fuel injectors, the fuel pump. Just stay clear of all that stuff. That being said, what can we tap into? Well, let's have a look in this list. These are some things we can look at. Now this car, fuse number 14, number 14, I think that's that one right there. We have a glass sliding roof. That's this 20 amp yellow fuse right here. This car doesn't have a glass sliding roof. It has no glass sliding roof. We could happily tap into that one, no problem at all. What else we got? Rear window wiper sounds important. Cigarette lighter. That's probably pretty good, as long as you're not running something high powered on there already, like an inverter. A cigarette lighter with a 15 amp maximum current through that circuit, perfectly fine. We could tap into 16 there. Outside mirror adjustment. I mean, you could bring down the fuse for your mirror adjustment. I wouldn't say it's the end of the world. It is an option. Going through here, fog lamps, I'd leave those alone. Diagnostic socket. Sometimes there's a circuit here just for diagnosing things with the car, probably used by the manufacturer in the factory if there's something going wrong. I mean, you could tap into that. I mean, it looks okay to me. I imagine when they're trying to diagnose something with the car, they're going to find it in there and pull it out, but it looks like to be a good 15 amp circuit to use. This car doesn't have a trailer hitch at all, and that has a fuse in there, number 25, 15 amp max circuit, perfectly fine. Radio, again, not really safety critical. Depending on how many, how much current your radio uses, it's an option. So again, you really want to work out how powerful your device is. It shouldn't be too powerful. Like I said, a dash cam is quite low amperage, so it is something you could sort of add in here. If it's a device that does eat up a few amperes there, a little high in current, you might not want to piggyback on the radio there. You might want to use something else, maybe something that's not even used, like the sunroof, for example. You don't want to mess with the alarm, the transmission, brake lights, anything to do with the engine controls. Heated seats could be pretty annoying if they go down, especially if it's cold. Heater, same again. But you get the idea, right? This is the thing. We don't want to bring down anything safety critical, anything of that nature. So there are a few options we can use there with locating something to piggyback off. So let's talk about one last thing which is quite important when considering which fuse circuit to piggyback from, and that is when the fuse itself, when the circuit here has power. Do we want our new piggyback device to have power when the key is off? Something like a car alarm would have that. Do we want it in the accessory position, so when the key is turned just one time? Or do we want our piggyback device to get power only when the car is running, when the alternator is charging the battery? So typically we have three options here to choose from. And to work out which fuse circuits get power at certain positions of the key, we can use something like a multimeter if our service manual doesn't highlight this information, which it doesn't. So in order to check our circuits here in the fuse box for the presence of power when the key is in different positions, we can use a standard multimeter like this, assuming our service manual doesn't already have this information. We're going to set it to DC volts. On this multimeter it's denoted by a little battery icon, but you'll typically see a V and this symbol right here. You don't want that one, the tilde, that's for alternating current. So we need to get this set up with the probes in the right position, and then we can start probing the fuses. So remember at the start of the video where I mentioned that a fuse would be inserted on the positive line of the circuit? So this just interrupts the positive line. In order to probe these, you can see there's two little metal terminals on top of here, which gives us access to the positive line here. I have the negative terminal here just touching the body of the car, because if you're not already aware, the whole entire chassis body of the car is one giant negative terminal there. That's the return line. And here's our positive probe, and we can probe either one of these assuming the fuse is good, and when we do that we're going to get a reading on our multimeter. Now looking at my diagram here, fuse number 28 is the alarm for the car. So even when the key is not inserted, this circuit will always get power because we always want the alarm on the car to work whether we're in it or out of it. So we're going to be probing fuse 28 with the key totally out of the car and the car's not even running, or in the accessory position, and we should get a voltage off of this circuit right here. So this is fuse number 28 for the security alarm. We're coming down here and we can see we get our 12 volt reading right there. It works great. We can also use this same logic to probe these empty terminals just to see if they actually do get power, even though these fuse circuits don't exist on this model of the car. So if I probe this empty slot right here and look at the multimeter, you can see we're getting a reading on there as well. So they perfectly do have power, they're just waiting for a fuse circuit. Then you probably guessed it, how do you identify a fuse circuit that gets power when the key is in a different position? Turn it to the next accessory position and probe the fuses. If they get power in this position, then you know they get power in the accessory position. It's pretty simple now, right? So once you think you've found a fuse circuit that's appropriate for tapping into, this glass sunroof looks pretty tasty for me, considering I don't even have one, for example. That's fuse number 14 right there. We're going to be removing fuse 14 to check which side is the side receiving power. So we're just going to pull this fuse out right now, so we're left with the socket. And remember at the start of the video where it says one line is coming from the power source and the other one is the output line from the fuse? Well, we need to determine which one is the power side. So we're going to probe the bottom one here first and then the top one and see which one reads 12 volts on our multimeter. So here's the bottom one and there's the top one right there. So you can see there, it looks like the top slot is the power line that comes from our power source. Now we know this is the power side. We talked about orientation of the fuse tap. We know exactly which way the fuse tap is going to be inserted into the fuse box. So now you should be the expert on this. Let's set up our fuse tapper. Remember, the existing circuit goes at the bottom there, so that's going to pretty much replicate what we already had. And then our brand new circuit sharing the positive line with the existing circuit will go in the top, and in here I'm going to put a nice 15 amp fuse because I want the fuse to blow when the current exceeds 15 amps. So it's going to look something like this. For reasons already explained in the video, you should never put a fuse at a higher rating in our new slot right here. It should be equal or lower than the existing circuit due to the sizing of the wiring behind the fuse slot itself. So now we know this is our positive line right here, and our positive slot is at the top. It makes sense to insert the fuse tap in this orientation right here. And now the fuse tap is inserted right here. This can go off to your new device and the return line from your device. And you know where that can go? Well, the body of the car is one giant negative terminal there, so it can pretty much go onto a nice solid ground there. So I hope you found this video useful, whether you're installing a dash cam or any other aftermarket accessory into your car or truck. Like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more videos coming very soon. Take care.